Have you heard of the Shroud of Turin? We have a burial cloth that may have an imprint of our Lord Jesus' face that's been preserved for 2,000 years. Some think that the Shroud of Turin may truly be the face of Jesus, while others remain skeptical. When I first heard of this, I thought to myself that there is no way that this is legit. However, our highly respected guest, Dr. Gary Habermas, leans towards the fact that this may really be Jesus' bloody imprint. Make sure you stick around until the end, because I'm going to ask him the one thing that people really believe to be the death blow to this actually being an imprint of Jesus, and that is the fact that it has been carbon dated to the 1300s.
Dr. Habermas, it is an honor to have you on the show once again. I am very thankful for the work that you've done in apologetics, and today is such an interesting topic, something totally out of the normal for our show. So I appreciate you coming on today.
Well, no problem. Glad to talk about it too.
So, like I said, it's a little bit different today. We normally go over theological topics, a little bit of apologetics, and we decided to switch it up a little bit because it's been intriguing me to know, especially Dr. Habermas's position on this. You know, what is going on with the Shroud of Turin, because I've been a Christian for about 15 years, and I had just recently heard about the Shroud, maybe 6 months ago or so.
Really?
And so, yeah, so I think it's a very intriguing topic. So for the people who are unsure of what the Shroud is, could you give us a general overview of what it is?
Sure. The shroud is a linen cloth, almost entirely linen. It's a little over 14 feet long. It's a little over 3.5 feet wide. And it has been laid lengthwise over a body from all appearances. I think maybe the way I can do this, let me hold up my pen like this and say, if this is the body, and you picture the cloth draped around both sides so that if it were opened on the bottom end, the 14 feet would be there and the body would theoretically fall out, just like my pen dropped. So the cloth in the front is from head to the top of the toes, and the back, it's from the back of the head to the heels. And it's open at the bottom where the 2 feet are, the front and back of the feet. And all kinds of questions come from that, but I'll let you take that away. But that's basically it. Its modern history is several hundred years old, and it's often argued that there are other sources that take it back, way back, either to the 1st century or compatible with the 1st century. In fact, an experiment was just done in an Italian university laboratory that concluded what I understand, I'm no scientist, but what I understand is a new kind of dating, or a different kind of dating. And the top shroud guy, probably best known shroud guy in the world right now, told me recently that method has a lot of promise, but they're going to have to do some more testing with it. But the conclusion is it's compatible with the 1st century date.
That is impressive. And I guess the sort of the kicker here and why it's an interesting topic, especially to a Christian, is that a lot of people say that this is the shroud that Jesus was buried in. And there's sort of an impression on it that looks as like a man, like you said, the front side and the back side. And people attribute it to Jesus's burial cloth. And so, Dr. Habermas, is that also your position, that it is Jesus?
I think it is likely, but that's what that other shroud guy was writing to me about just minutes ago. He publishes a lot on it, and he said, "Hey, I've been hearing your view for a long time, and I just want to know what's the latest. Where are you coming from?" And I told him, I'll often tease in interviews, and I'll say, I'm 80% on a bad day, and I'm 90% on a really good day when it's shining out and it's not raining. And so he actually recalled that comment. He said, what did you mean by it depends on what side of the bed you get up on or whether it's raining? It's a scientific artifact, so it is always open to reevaluation. And I'm sure what some shroud people are afraid of is either a new carbon dating will be done and it won't be what they want, or that somebody will come up with a method that looks like it is a possible method. And so far, I mean, serious scientific tests have been going on for about 50 years, and nobody's come up with that. It's said, and that you can read in the press clippings, so and so and so and so think they've done it. And then when you read between the lines, it's always, we've sort of done it except for about 3 things we can't figure out yet. You get that kind of caveat when you read these articles, and nobody's been able to fake it. One thing's for sure: there's no paint, dye, powder, or any foreign substance on the cloth. Now, there's a lot of junk on the cloth because this thing has been, brought out in public and into the air, and all kinds of things, even insect parts. But I mean, junk on it, but no paint, dye, powder, any foreign substance, which could account for the image. And there is a head-to-head image on the cloth. Again, if the cloth goes from the head to the feet, the image on that side goes from the face to the top of the feet. The image on the back, from the back of the head to the heels, there's a full body image. There are hundreds of burial garments in existence. And there you go. Hundreds of burial garments in existence. And none of them have images like this on it. And it's the exactness of that image that really wows people.
Yeah. So I pulled it up on screen here.
Yep.
And so we know that this could be from the 1st century, and what it is, it's an impression of a man. But what's the connection here to Jesus? Why would this be attributed to Jesus and not just some random person who lived back in the 1st century?
Sure. We know a lot of crucifixions took place. Josephus tells us that the Romans ran out of wood when they captured Jerusalem in the Jewish-Roman wars, and many people died by crucifixion, and even today crucifixion is done by some people. So you're right, it could be somebody else's, but you're going to have to answer some historical questions now. The science will have to tell us whether it's a fake and what caused it. History will have to answer the question, why Jesus and not somebody else? And the way I answer that is, if it is an actual archaeological artifact, and I think it is, in other words, it's not a fake, but as you say, it could have buried somebody else or wrapped somebody else. But if it's an actual archaeological artifact, here's an argument for it being Jesus. If your son or daughter is doing a paper for school on all about crucifixion, they'll usually, I would imagine, would go to the Gospels to look up the data, because as many New Testament scholars note, there's more information on crucifixion in the Gospels than anywhere else. And then they use then their soldiers did this, and then they did that, and then they did that. But Jesus' crucifixion was not a normal crucifixion. For example, why do you put a crown of thorns or the equivalent on a man's head who is believed in some sense to be a traitor, false prophet, whatever? Why a crown of thorns? Most people at that time, unless they were very rich and well known, they were buried in rectangular graves in the ground, sort of like the way we bury without coffins, and they're buried in the dirt. Rich people in Jerusalem could afford limestone caves, which they dot Jerusalem. They weren't used all that long, but the caves are still there. All right, so Jesus has a crown of thorns. He's whipped very seriously before his scourging. Now, they did whip people before they crucified him, but why would you whip somebody virtually to death before you put them to death? Seems like that would be a little counteractive. You're going to be hanging a guy up there who's in a coma or largely dead. So Jesus had a serious beating. This man has been beaten on every inch of his body, with the exception of his face, his forearms, and his feet. The counting is difficult because in your picture there, you saw that there are several places the shroud's been in more than one fire, and there are burn marks up and down the shroud. So you got to count, you got to guess how many marks would be there behind those burn marks. Anyway, estimates are that there are way over 100 whipping marks. Now, it's commonly believed that the instrument used had 3 pieces of rawhide or whatever attached to it. And in this case, it looks like a dumbbell-shaped piece of lead was attached to the end of it. And so you might have to divide by 3. And some comments are that he had 120 or 150 whipping marks. You divide that by 3, and you're going to get 30 to 50 lashes. The Jews only believed in 39 lashes, but these aren't the Jews. These are the Romans. So, I mean, you would think Romans. So now you got some hints. Romans, badly wounded. Where did the marks in the skull come from, in the hairline come from? This man's been pierced in the side, which, by the way, is not just reported in the Gospel of John, but it is reported by a Roman historian who says something to the effect of, it's in Latin, but he says, the centurion, when he takes the body down from the cross, the centurion will give the body to the families that want it after they've stabbed it, pierced it one last time. And that word pierced in the Latin source is a military term that means it was usually done in the literature with a spear, a sword, or an axe. So they would give the body one final blow and then let the family take the body. Well, a spear wound in the side is visible in the picture there. It's underneath that one patch, but on the right hand side, see in your picture, it's on the left hand side because there's a right-left reversal on these photos, and it goes down and it flows along the waist and the back. So
right here, is it this mark right here?
I can't see where your arrow is.
Oh, here we go. Over here.
Yeah, there you go. That's it.
Okay.
The cut, the place where it is almost 2 inches long. And it's in the side of the chest. And of course, they're lower than this person. So they're jabbing upwards. So it's going up into the diaphragm area. And then when on the back, can you see the blood flow across the waist of the back image down there in the right there? The line that goes back and forth, that's also from the chest wound. And there's a blood and water substance. The chief pathologist for the team, Bob Buckland, said, he was at LA County Coroner, by the way, used to this kind of thing. He said there's a watery serum and it's more visible in the back than it is in the front. So this man just has a lot of similarity to Jesus. We can't say it looks like Jesus. That would just be kind of a circular argument. But the crown of thorns, the serious whipping, buried in an individual tomb, which would be very, very rare, especially for crucifixion victims to be in a private. Yeah, they put them in the ground to give them burial. Josephus says that they even buried crucifixion victims because they respected bodies, a person's body in Israel. But this person's buried in a tomb. And then, according to the same chief pathologist, Bob Buckland, there's no decomposition on the cloth. There's no bodily decomposition. So he says that means, obviously, the cloth would have to have been unwrapped very quickly. So there's no decomposition. Why was the cloth off of it? What happened? And then combine that all with the latest, by far the most common explanation is that the image on the shroud is caused by radiation of some sort, possibly more than one form of radiation. And now you start thinking, oh my gosh, if this looks like Jesus, and if all these things were done to him, doesn't make a good report on crucifixion, but it makes a good report on Jesus' crucifixion, very odd things. And then if you have radiation coming from a oh my, what does that say about the resurrection? And one of the first books that came out on this subject back in, I believe, 1978 by Ian Wilson, he ends his book by saying, you never know. The Shroud of Turin could be a photograph of the resurrection of Jesus. A photograph the way an X-ray of a broken leg is a photograph, because it's believed by many, by the experiments, that this image is caused by radiation.
So it's not just caused by this body being covered by blood and then just rubbing off on the cloth. It's like burned into the cloth somehow.
Okay, the rubbing is true. The burning wouldn't come naturally. Now,
Okay.
when you look at that shroud image, the blood is a contact image. The blood came from the linen lying on open cuts, and you would say, well, if it wasn't that, I'd wonder about it, because of course it's going to bleed out of the cloth. But the image is not a contact image. The image did not get there from contact with the cloth. In fact, in some places, the body, the skin, was not in contact with the cloth for up to a couple centimeters. So whatever, if that cloth, let's say your rib cage, let's say the low points on your face, if it's going to be on your nose and on your eyebrows, what about the cheeks on the side? What about the rib cage if it's on the chest? And so on. By the way, his hands are crossed in front of him. So if it's over the hands that are over his midriff, if it's over the hands, how does it get the ribs behind him? So contact won't explain the image. Whatever caused the image, I don't want to say jumped across space. That sounds too mysterious. But it had to move through space in some sense, because the image does not come from contact, whereas the blood does.
Interesting. So this image was sort of superimposed onto the cloth through some sort of means, potentially radiation.
Yep.
Started out with contact, though. Lots of evidence for it possibly being Jesus. Yep. I have seen a couple arguments against it. Yep. The first one being the carbon dating. You mentioned carbon dating earlier.
Yep.
And I saw that there was a attempt to carbon date the cloth, and it came back as possibly, I think, 13th century.
Yep.
So what would you say to that?
Yeah. Strangely enough, I was reading an article this morning that hasn't been out for too long from a friend of mine who did some shroud experiments, he and 3 other people, four authors, and it was published in an Oxford journal. Interestingly, if I got this right, I hope I'm not giving this incorrectly, but if I heard right, the journal that published his follow-up article, is the editor for that journal was one of the guys whose name was on the original 1988 Oxford journal that said that the shroud was a fake. And now this guy, basically, to be an editor and to let this argument go is to say, you know, this is worthy of another look. Now, what they're arguing, this guy's name is Tristan Casabianca. He's French. And 4 people, including 2 statisticians, they filed a couple years ago, or a couple years before they got it, I understand, they filed a Freedom of Information Act to get the dates of the shroud from all 3 labs, because that stuff wasn't let out. They were just told what the average was. And when the statisticians looked at it, they came unglued. They said, this is not the way you do stats. And they thought it was even a joke. Apparently what happened was they took these dates and averaged them. And the statisticians say, you don't average things. When you have a date in the 7th century and you have a date in the 13th century, you don't average them and say, oh, it's 1050. When the outliers, when they're all over the place and you only have a few dates, you have to throw the thing out and do it again. You don't have a reputable sample because the dates are here and there. So he just published an article, Tristan did, and his team published an article about 2 years ago, and it argues that we don't know what the shroud date is, but it's not what these other guys said in 1988.
Interesting. So basically, they published results that weren't. Do you think it was purposely? I I don't want to accuse people of stuff, but do you think that they were tampering sort of with the results in order to get the conclusion that they wanted?
There have been a lot of claims in both directions that there's
Okay.
tampering on the one side and that Christians are only telling you what they believe on the other side. So, but you still have to deal with the science, and the science is, don't tell us anymore that it's late medieval until you do a better test, because the test you did was, you talked to all your physicist buddies and didn't talk to the statisticians, and you can't print results like that. And as I said, it was published, I believe, by one of the guys whose name was on the 88 medieval date. So right now, it doesn't mean, oh yeah, so they know, it doesn't follow that it's the first century. It just means it's open. And
Right.
plus, there's other arguments out there that say that you'll probably never get a date on the shroud, no matter what you do, because the shroud has been in 2 fires, and that builds up the carbon content on the cloth, and the carbon content will change carbon dating, carbon content. It's going to confuse the data. But there's a lot of tests going on right now, and something may break, something might not. And that's why that's why I'm not 100%. That's why I hold off a little bit myself. But there's no good date at this time. Now, I will tell you, there's been a couple. I told you about the one that was just run a few months ago, where it was consistent with the first century date. But like when I complained, I wrote a critique to the main shroud guy, and I said, hey, let's let the philosophers get in here. Here's a philosophical problem. Because something is consistent with the first century date, how do you know? It could be consistent with the 10th century date. You're just telling me from this test, nothing keeps it from being first century. That's consistent. But nothing keeps it from being 10th century. Nothing keeps it from being last week. Now, I'm being facetious, but what I mean is, just to say it's consistent with first century, that's not really, that's not good with me. And the guy wrote back, and the guy's pretty skeptical, this Shroud guy. He wrote back and he said, I agree with all your criticisms, but I would only say this: let's give the people in Italy a little more time, because if they can work this dating method out, it might become very useful. Right now it's up in the air. So that's the latest. But that's only one of several tests that they have done that, well, I'll tell you this too. There were rumors back in the day when they did the carbon-14 from the Middle Ages. There were rumors that a couple other dating tests were run privately on samples that people had. And I'll just say this: they don't like the material out, but let's just say the other testing that I was told about from the guys who were in control is that the date was much earlier on another sort of dating, like a normal dating test,
right.
in a major university. So it's kind of up in the air. People can always come back. People can always criticize, and believers can always believe. But we kind of keep coming back to that image. That image is very, very puzzling, because there are hundreds of burial garments, like I said. They can have bodily decomposition on them. They can have blood stains, but they don't have body images. And this is a complete body image of some very meticulous things. They think they can tell how the man in the shroud died. They think they can tell all kinds of things about the position of his body and so on. For example, they say it looks like he died by asphyxiation, because on a very, what should I say, good-looking body, like not like a weightlifter, but a person who's a common laborer, a person who looks good, he's got a distended abdomen. And a distended abdomen comes from, if I get this right anatomically, from the last stages of asphyxiation, where you're pushing like crazy to get air in your lungs, and you're not being able to. The problem with this kind of asphyxiation is you can inhale, but you can't exhale. It's like asthma. An asthmatic has trouble exhaling, and that's where I think the abdomen comes from. But they can say that about the guy in the shroud. His body's in a state of rigor mortis, by the way. The left leg is popped back up where the knee is up, and the 2 feet, the left foot is over toward the right one, like this, like as if they were nailed by a single nail with one foot on top of the other. So he's in rigor mortis. You can't fake that. The wound in the side is post-mortem blood flow. He's definitely dead. No scientist that I know of has suggested otherwise. And a lot of medical people have been involved in this too.
That's really interesting. I haven't been able to dive deep into the science like that. And I appreciate you spending so much time researching this so you can forward this information to us.
Well, I've co-authored a couple of books on it years ago with the guy I co-authored with was the editor and spokesperson for the team of scientists that did the big investigation in 1978, Ken Stevenson. So I had to do the research, and I did it right after. I started it in 1978, the research, and they were getting ready to go test it. Actually, they had just returned, and I was questioning about the results. But since my dissertation was on the resurrection of Jesus, obviously I was interested in what the shroud could contribute or not contribute.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate your work. I love your books. I love your interviews and your talks about the resurrection and now the shroud as well. I have so many more questions, but we are running short on time. So,
That's
Dr.
right.
Habermas, thank you so much for being on the show with me.
Enjoyed it. Thank you very much.